Hello and welcome to this special edition of the ILEETA Learning Lab. My name is Joe Willis. I'm the Deputy Executive Director for ILEETA, and I'm here today with Jason Sherwin, Dr. Jason Sherwin of deCervo, and he's teaching a class at ILEETA 2026 coming up in St. Louis in March 16th through the 21st. His class is called Neuroscience of Law Enforcement Decision with Applications. So without any further ado, Jason, take us away. Tell us what we're going to get from this class and how you came up with it. Why does this matter?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. My training is in neuroscience, aerospace engineering, physics. I was a Ph.D. and master's from Georgia Tech in aerospace engineering. Before that, bachelor's in physics at University of Chicago. My postdoctoral work, though, after the Ph.D. At Columbia University, that's where I started shifting into the neuroscience world. And we were studying neuroimaging. So that's how you take pictures of the brain, basically. If everyone's ever had an MRI, that's a neuroimage. And particularly at Columbia, we were studying how you neuroimage perceptual decision-making. And perceptual decision-making is really research about how the brain makes rapid choices under time pressure. That really became the foundation for deCervo. And deCervo is kind of an anglicized way of saying of the brain, from French, or like a Latin root of that, of how you would say of the brain, deCervo. But it also kind of sounds like decisions, right? So we study decisions at deCervo. And for over a decade, we have translated brain science into practical training tools. First, we started in professional sports. We didn't start in law enforcement. We started in baseball with the hitters in terms of how they make rapid decisions on pitches that are coming at them. Since then, we got into other sports, particularly hockey officiating. We've worked with the NHL for the last 8 seasons now. And now we're in law enforcement since about 2018, 2019. And that's done through our eTrain platform. And the focus is always on improving high stakes and time-sensitive decisions.
I love it. And I think, you taught last year at the conference, and as you come back in this year, this topic in general, as we look at both the system 1, system 2 thinking, if I understand correctly, largely what you're trying to get after is there's a parallel training methodology or a requirement for training both systems simultaneously. So if you don't mind, kind of walk us through, many of our listeners would know, but some may not. What is that? What the system 1, system 2, unconscious, conscious type decision making?
Yeah, absolutely. It comes straight from cognitive neuroscience, specifically Daniel Kahneman's work. So I've actually at ILEETA one year, I saw someone talk about Daniel Kahneman's book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And that's about the fast, intuitive kind of thought process versus a more slow and deliberate thinking process. So in fast thinking, that's handled by areas that have to interact with the visual cortex. But you have fast thinking kind of areas that are driving emotions, like the basal ganglia, thalamus, interior regions of the brain. Those are all mechanisms within the brain that make automatic pattern recognition happen, particularly under pressure, right? Slow thinking, on the other hand, engages things like, the visual cortex does things fast, but not in comparison to like basal ganglia and thalamus. So slow thinking, kind of going more in that direction. The visual cortex does some things kind of slow, but the slower parts are the prefrontal cortex, where you're like analyzing things, planning things. If you have like a post-incident review, like report writing, that's more handled with the slow kind of thinking process. And, policing is unique because many decisions begin and are executed in the field as fast perceptual calls, right? But then they have to face the slow, high scrutiny evaluation afterwards. And actually it was at ILEETA that I first got exposed to the report writing focus in law enforcement by Christopher Fankuka's course that he does on this. So that's the next stage, is really that slow thinking process. And so really understanding that tension on a neurological level, going from the fast decision-making to the slow decision-making that follows, that's really something that's going to help trainers design programs that can strengthen really both modes of working for police officers, for law enforcement.
I love it. And so, as you talk about those two things in the context of law enforcement, there are days, an entire shift of absolute boredom or just and we hesitate to ever use the word routine, but often that system one sort of thinking where it is did I say that right? System one, the more unconscious, yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
The fast thinking. It is you're just literally driving and you see an infraction, you deal with it, followed by an immediate fight or flight type of a response. And oftentimes in law enforcement, there's a lot of chronic stress and a lot of distraction and that sort of thing. So as you look at those moments of fast and slow thinking, system one, system two, what role does that play? The chronic stress, the mundane, the routine, that sort of thing, followed by these moments of rapid decision making. What are you seeing there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, officers routinely are making decisions in under a second, right? Whether it's like spotting a threat gesture, you're driving and you see something and you react right away. Reading intent during a stop, right? Choosing a de-escalation path or more of like the grades of use of force path. Those are all these micro decisions that happen in split seconds, really less than a second in terms of the time scale of them. And so these are all the thinking fast type decisions that rely on specific brain circuits to accumulate sensory evidence and then trigger an action almost automatically, right? But the way it does that automatically is it relies on those deeper down brain structures. They call them subcortical because it's underneath the cortex. So like I talked about the thalamus before, the basal ganglia, things like that. Those are all structures that enable the fast and kind of automatic response. When stress is involved, or like you're having a good day or a bad day or whatever else is going on in life, the kids are crazy at home this morning, whatever it was, that can have an effect, right? It doesn't necessarily have an effect, but it can have an effect because it uses the same circuitry, right? I'll give you an example of this that comes from real life and actually connects very well to this year's course, which I highly recommend everybody attend, even if you came last year, because we will have some differences for our course this year. One of which is talking about a study that will be in the conference edition of the journal, which is done with the Camillus, New York Police Department. And that's going to be a review of our case work with them at their with their in-service training. And it began with a recruit to a regional academy at Syracuse who Camillus sent to, right? So they sent one of their recruits to that academy. So we knew how this recruit was absorbing basic information about vehicle stops, constitutional policing, use of force decisions, mental health episodes, suicide by cop, a whole range of things, right? DUIs, right? And so when we got to the end of the academy, this was about 2 falls ago right now, so almost 2 years ago in the fall. And when we got to the end of the academy, the recruit was showing a profound ability across all those categories I just listed, right? He was really good at use of force decisions. He was really good at de-escalation and tactics, and right, all these things. A DUI, he was like 20% below his average on all these other categories. And the related category of vehicle stops, he was like 15% below. So to give you a sense, he was like around 75, 80% average across all categories. So some categories were above, like 85, 90. Some were below, like, 81, 82, 72, things like that. DUI was like 55%. And vehicle stops was like 65%. So it's like averages here, all the other categories are up here. And it's like DUI down here, vehicle stops, not much better, but still significantly low. And so I'm showing this after the academy to the chief. And I say, Chief, he was really good at this. He was really good at that. he was one of the leaders in the class in terms of overall accuracy. He was one of the fastest decision makers in terms of his response time. But this DUI thing is kind of strange, and see this related thing with vehicle stops. And he goes to me, that's really interesting. And I said, why? He says, you're not going to believe this, but he was actually arrested for a DUI before he got into law enforcement.
Got it.
And so when he said that, I thought, okay, tell me a bit more. So he says, well, he's a really good dude. He's a Marine veteran, right? He was back from being in the Marines. He's a really good guy. He got arrested for a DUI one time. So the chief said to me, I think I know what's going on here. I said, what's going on? He said, he pulls over somebody for a DUI. He's in the interaction with them. He says, I'm a good person, right? I'm a good guy. You're a good guy, right? So he's got these kind of like blinders when he's doing the DUI stop, and that's impacting how he enforces the law, right? So that's why his performance is likely like, 15, 20 points below his average and like 20 points below his other premier categories. And that's
you were
also
literally able to measure this bias, and essentially that's what it is. It's an unconscious
exactly
bias.
That's what I said to the chief. I said,
Yeah.
Chief, they throw around that term implicit bias, especially in New York State, right? You heard of that, right? He's like, yeah, I heard of that. I said, this is it right here, right? Like, it's not just a racial thing. It's not just a gender thing. He's got a bias when it comes to these types of traffic enforcements, right? And so what can happen going forward is you've got this data now. You can see what it's telling about him. There's two different ways, and we covered this actually in last year's article for the ILEETA Journal with Mark Russin, who's now the chief of police actually at Syracuse. He was a deputy chief at the time, but he's really kind of our avenue to the academy there. Mark and I wrote about, Mark particularly emphasized the fact that you can then use this information for pairing assignments with FTO to say, like, you know what? He's great at use of force. He's also great at constitutional policing. We don't need to pair him with somebody who's really good at those things because he knows them already. But he sucks at DUI and he's pretty bad at vehicle stops as a result. So let's pair him with somebody who's older, more experienced, right? Who can instruct him along those ways and the practicalities of doing a DUI in law enforcement. That's a great example right there about how you can, in terms of like an instructor tip, right? Being able to take that data and being able to, you don't have to like continue using E-Train ever again after that, right? You could just say, you know what? I know this is a problem for this guy. We're going to address it in terms of pairing him up with an FTO who can guide him in this capacity hands-on. Now, we ended up actually working with Camillus over the next year with that officer and several others. And so that's actually going to be the focus of our ILEETA journal this year ahead of the conference, which is going to be a review of the case study where we looked at this specific case and several other officers that did the training with E-Train as it adapts to their strengths and weaknesses. And I can talk more about that, but all over the course of 2025.
Very cool. So what I'm hearing you say in that is that through intentionally diagnosing, very effortful, specific diagnosis of here's a training deficiency, and getting also the qualitative information, right? Like, oh, there's this part of the story too, that you can then begin to diagnose biases or challenges in unconscious thinking, right? Because there are so many of them in the habits we have and that sort of thing, and early life biases and experiences. And one of the things we often hear in law enforcement is based on my training and experience, this, right?
Exactly.
And so you're telling me that through intentional design of experiences, we can retrain and untrain biases?
Basically, yeah, I would kind of change the language a little bit because I wouldn't, like, even though you introduced me as a doctor, I'm not that kind of doctor, so we don't really diagnose the same way. But I would say we kind of, and I know evaluates is also like a 4-letter word. Eval is a 4-letter word in law enforcement, but we do have to, God forbid, evaluate a little bit. But the great thing about the way we do it is that it can either be done anonymously, and I can talk more about that, and that's kind of what we do in the demo portion when we've when we've taught this course at ILEETA. So nobody's on the spot. It's not like, oh, Joe Willis, you just decided to shoot grandma, Joe. The decision right here isn't to shoot grandma. Let's everybody in the class make fun of Joe now, right? No, we do it in an anonymous way. But when we worked with individual officers, like academy level, right, they're uniquely assigned to a login, so we know exactly what they are doing along the way. Because at that stage, they don't know anything. Right? Like, they have no idea what a vehicle stop's supposed to be like. They have no idea really what the Fourth Amendment means, right? So they don't know a lot of this stuff, right? They probably don't, right? But the nice thing about us when we work with the academy level is that we get to see like what their biases are and what their knowledge is, right? Because sometimes they do know what the Fourth Amendment is. Sometimes they do know what free speech is. Sometimes they do know what vehicle stop technique is. Sometimes they do know what tactical decisions are good ones and bad ones, right? And being able to evaluate that on a micro decision level, right, is incredibly valuable for instructors to know what a recruit is going to do when they get out into the field, or an FTO, what they're going to do when they get out there. Or for, we generally find our sweet spot within the first, 0 to 5 years of employment as a law enforcement officer, because once you get past like the 5-year mark, maybe even a few years out, like, you're pretty good at it. You kind of know what to do. And everyone loves refining skills, and everyone's got a different appetite for refining skills when you get to a certain level of how well you are performing, right? I can go back to our sports experience where we came from, and like, we didn't work with almost no Major League Baseball hitters, like almost zero. There are a few here and there who are in that kind of special group who want to really refine the micro things and stuff like that. But like, they got to being a Major League hitter already, right? They don't need us, right? Only a very select few have that kind of philosophical, like, performance driven mindset to be able to like reanalyze themselves. And, it's like the Michael Jackson song, look at the man in the mirror, right? It's like the hardest thing to do, right? And so, but with the academy level, with the 0 to 5 years out officers, it's much easier because they're also searching for those answers, right? But at the same time, you want to do it in a way that's amenable to, employment considerations, the 4-letter word of eval and everything else. So we're not exactly like erasing people's biases, right? It's kind of like something that I said to, Rudy Hall is a retired sergeant from New York City Police, from NYPD, later with the AG's office, Attorney General office. We were interviewed by Wired magazine, and one of us said, I don't know which one, but one of us said, we know people have biases, we just don't want them to show up to work. And that's pretty much it, right? It's like, your biases could be helpful in some regards in terms of preserving your life. That's a bias, right? And that's that's very important actually in the last year, because of the uniformity now of the totality of circumstances when it comes to use of force decisions, right? So that's a bias that everyone has and should have and is legally allowed to have, right? And so, but there are other biases that are not so helpful, right? And so like this DUI one is a great example of one that could actually impact this officer in terms of preserving his own life later on, or preserving the application of law in his community, because he's not enforcing it equally to, the way he does other things. And it's why? Well, because he has this background.
So we don't want it to show up to work. And I think the key piece to that is, like you said, the awareness of it. So yeah, I won't say eval or diagnose, but I will say the awareness of our biases. And it's easier to put them away, or at least in the moment, recognize that I have a potential for bias here. And it's also easier for my leadership and my trainers to train me to do that if we're aware of it. And so how important, it would kind of change gears here just a little bit as we get ready to kind of close this out. How important is it, and what is the real reason that a law enforcement trainer and educator needs to be aware of how each system of the brain works, or each decision-making system works? What's the relevance there in your words?
I mean, it's fundamental to doing anything as an officer, right? It's fundamental to operating in the world, right? But like in terms of the short time intervals that, you know, law enforcement decisions happen, and everybody focuses on what I call the shooting gallery, right? Everybody focuses on use of force decisions, right? You know, you go to the Expo, even at ILEETA, right? You'll have a lot related to target practice and firearms and things like that, and taser and other, right? So they're all use of force type decisions, right? Those are a very small percentage of the decisions that actually happen. I got a real number actually from one of our clients the other day. They had over 15,000 calls for service and interactions, and they had 0.00038% of those were either use of force or firearms display calls, right? So, I mean, we're in the way less than 0.001% of cases that involve firearm or some kind of use of force. Yet you go to an expo and like, I don't know, 60%, 70% of the displays have to do with use of force decisions, right? But there are, by just that 0.001% thing, right? You've got 99 point whatever 999% of these micro decisions going on in these calls for service that are looking at intent, judging tactics, you know, all these kinds of decisions that we actually will focus on in you know, in our class and walk through some, you know, body cam footage of, but also participants will get a chance to do that themselves. And so trainers who are coming as the participants, they're going to get a chance to do this as well, because it's one thing to hear a course about it, like, oh, this is thinking fast and that's thinking slow and that's nice. But how do I apply it next week, right? How do I, even without calling us, how do I take this knowledge back and use it in roll call when we're analyzing a case from last week, right? How do I walk them through a video and say, yeah, see that decision there? That's what we don't want you to do. Fast forward a little bit while later in the let the video play, see how much farther we are in the video now. How much evidence has been presented at this point in the scenario? Can you do a search now? Do you have to ask for something else before you do a search, right? Those are all things that are practical tips that instructors can take with them out of our course, right? Obviously, we've made a tool to make that a lot faster and easier and develop that skill that much faster for law enforcement. And, you know, so I think that's really something that an instructor can pull out of this.
Yeah, I love it. And I think so over the years, we've talked about different decision-making pathways and that sort of thing, and the importance of training the elephant and the riders, and an analogy that's often used. And all of that, we, you know, many people understand the importance of it, but what you're getting after, and that's what I was hoping you would share with us here, and you have, is that even if they go with deCervo, and there's, because they have the opportunity, as anyone does, to train with you later on. But at the ILEETA conference, as you know, and you've already demonstrated in the past, that trainers will come into that room not knowing what the budget is for a product like yours or any of that kind of stuff. What they want is literally what you just said. How can I use this next week when I have to go back to work? What are they leaving with right now? I heard you say kind of some ideas of how to develop these things in their own agency. But if you can put a bow on that for me, like, I've come to your course, what will I be more prepared to do when I get back to my department, and hopefully reconnect with you in the future? But even if I can't, it's not in the budget for me, what will I be able to do?
Yeah, no, well, really, you know, for any trainer, if you want to ground your decision-making training in peer-reviewed neuroscience, like the latest, right, while keeping it practical and immediately applicable, this is really the session designed for you, right? Because we're going to move from the brain fundamentals, right, pretty quickly, because you need that stuff up front, right? You can't drive a car unless you know that the gas is somehow connected to the engine that makes it move, right? And you can't drive a car unless you know that the other pedal hits the brakes and allows you to stop, right? So like, you need those kind of fundamentals. So we will all get a mini PhD in brain fundamentals in about 20 minutes in this course, but we will spend the majority of the time on hands-on examples to agency implementation. It's all rooted in the research that began in the lab and has been refined over the 10 years at deCervo. And so, what you'll be able to walk away with are techniques for analyzing real life interactions, either coming from body cam or dash cam, which is all internal already to most departments or publicly available online, right? And you can take those videos yourself and use them in a kind of instructor classroom format, which we'll do using eTrain as kind of the prop, as the tool for doing that. But you could just do that yourselves using the kind of approach we'll do for, starting with a scenario like you got to call a 911 call for a domestic violence disturbance, and then boom, the video starts, right? And then, you stop the video 10 seconds in, and it's like, okay, what do you need to know from these people at this point in time who are sitting on the steps outside the house, right? And you can do that with your class, right? You can ask somebody individually. You can try to engage the whole class as a whole. That's got all sorts of issues to it sometimes that we'll talk about, in terms of how you engage as an instructor. But, you will get a kind of a real life scenario-based tool framework to use. Obviously, we recommend our tool as eTrain as a way to do it faster, but that's a methodology that you'll be able to walk out of there with, rooted in the fundamentals of how the brain functions of every one of your recruits, every one of your officers, even though sometimes you're wondering where the hell their brain was. And so, this is really the how it works, and maybe it's not working perfectly, but this is the method that you can use to figure out what is going on with it, to, God forbid, evaluate it, but also evaluate it internally so that then you can help them and coach them and guide them and mentor them to get to the place where they want to go. So, I'm really looking forward to the discussion, and to helping in advance, how we prepare officers for the split second choices, that really define this job. So I look forward to seeing everybody in St. Louis in March.
Man, I'm so excited about it, and I really appreciate how you explained that there towards the end about, and I hope everyone who comes to ILEETA understands that we've got industry experts who work in the private sector like yourself, have a company that does this, but you're invested in the development of the profession to the point where you just want people to do better, and you're willing to give them the tools to do that. And then that's how trust is built. And I hope all the vendors, realize that just the same. So I'm sitting on the fence. I don't know which class I'm going to go to, and I'm trying to figure out, which one specifically. You've hit the nail on the head as far as how that, why choose your course, getting after that neuroscience of law enforcement decisions with applications, and really diving into that. So thank you so much for spending this time with me today. With that, I'm going to turn it over to you for the last word. Any recommendations for folks coming to the ILEETA conference or sitting on the fence about whether or not they're going to, or just kind of what would your message to the ILEETA membership be?
To the membership, I would say really, first you want to be able to get this kind of, background in terms of how the brain of every one of your officers is working, really. So you get that kind of neuroscience informed perspective, but then apply it directly to the kind of evidence that is being collected, the video evidence that's being collected on a regular basis now, but really being able to leverage that for training purposes, right? As we see it right now, it is totally underutilized, right? And there's been a start in utilizing that kind of video evidence, but this is really the next evolution of it, to be able to really give, use these videos for making scenarios and reality-based, scenario-based training that can really be used to hone the skills that you're trying to get into the heads and into the actions of your officers and of your trainees. And so that's really, I think, you won't find that really with many other courses at ILEETA. One of the reasons we have come to ILEETA in the past, and then we were honored to be invited to speak at it last year, is that we saw a culture of learning. We saw a culture of applied scholarship really at ILEETA. And so we've been excited to partner with ILEETA in that regard, starting last year and continuing that this year. And I can tell you from last year, we've had several agencies that have, actively started engaging with us since then. One of whom has become a client of ours as well, and they've really grown from this. And even when you come in with, oh man, I got to deal with budgets and whatever else, like we guide folks through that kind of process as much as possible. But even if that doesn't happen, you're still going to walk away with some great information and practical things you can do, and an avenue to bring that to the next level for your own trainees and your own recruits.
Awesome. Jason, thank you so much for spending the time with us today. I'm really looking forward to seeing you and everybody else in St. Louis, March 16th through the 21st. Thank you,
Great.
everybody.